He's immensely seductive. Quite sure he's right. Obsessionally neurotic. Pretty dangerous, in fact.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories.
Do you mean you doubt your powers to convince him?
Say it! Say it!
All right, I'll say it.
Worse than that. What I'm afraid of is his power to convince me.
We're talking about putting a manifestly irresponsible man on national television.
Sweetheart, be reasonable.
What? This is the end game.
Somehow my mic just went muted. That was very strange. We're going to talk quite a bit about the feckless and illegitimate Congress and Senate today, then some election stuff. Then we're going to get into some geopolitics and then that crisis group report. I think we can get there. I think we can do it all. I'm going to try to do it all. But let's start with Una Panoona. Here she is on X, formerly Twitter. Earlier today, she said, "Today I introduced the American Privacy Restoration Act to fully repeal the Patriot Act and strip rogue intelligence officers of their extraordinary mass surveillance powers. Since the passage of the USA Patriot Act in the aftermath of 9/11, intelligence agency officials have used their mass surveillance tools to settle personal scores, interfere in elections, and spy on untold numbers of innocent Americans. This abuse must come to an end." And we are going to follow that link over to Breitbart. And just to be clear, with all the fun we have with Una Panoona, the Patriot Act still got to go. So good for her. I mean, it's not going to matter, but good for her. There's nothing bad to say about that, at least right now. I mean, who knows? I think a lot of these people are just trying to take credit for things that were going to happen regardless. So I'm not terribly impressed by it. And I don't believe that the Congress actually has any legitimate power here in the first place, but that was probably also true when they passed the Patriot Act. Okay, so Breitbart on this story. Representative Anna Paulina Luna proposes to strip deep state surveillance tools by repealing Patriot Act. She said in a written statement to Breitbart, "For over 2 decades, rogue actors within our intelligence agencies have used the Patriot Act to create the most sophisticated, unaccountable surveillance apparatus in the Western world." And I'm sure it's not just the USA. A couple interesting quotes here from a woman named Elizabeth Goitein, who is Senior Director for the Liberty and National Security Program at the Brennan Center, which is a liberal globalist think tank. But if you're right, you're right. "In a variety of contexts, it became lawful for the government to collect an American sensitive information based merely on a claim that the information was relevant to a legitimate purpose, regardless of whether the person was reasonably suspected of wrongdoing. Even for the most sensitive of information, communications content, Congress gave the NSA free rein to collect phone calls, texts, and emails between foreign targets and Americans, communications that previously could not be obtained domestically without a court order based on probable cause." And she said that it actually has not provided safety benefits. She said, "Also surprisingly, there is zero evidence that suspicionless surveillance has made us safer. Consider the NSA's program of bulk collection, the poster child for suspicionless surveillance, in which the agency obtained Americans' phone records en masse. 2 independent reviews found that this program yielded little to no counterterrorism benefit. Indeed, there is evidence that overcollection is counterproductive. Multiple government reviews of domestic terrorist incidents have found that agents missed signs of trouble because those signs were lost in the noise of irrelevant data." She said, "Achieving this goal will require restoring limitations that were stripped out of the law after 9/11, as well as enacting new ones to ensure that American sensitive information is protected from disclosure, regardless of who holds the information or the technology used to capture it. Now, I'm not sure if that's possible, and I'm certainly doubtful that passing new legislation is going to make the difference there. But there is certainly a surveillance problem, and I cannot imagine, considering that terrorism is quite often a byproduct of the global intelligence agency's own activity. I don't think giving them all of our information is going to slow down terrorism that they are instigating in the first place. So that seems ridiculous. It's interesting in regard to the NSA because, as we talked about on Devolution Power Hour a few weeks ago, the potential split between or the two-hat problem with Cybercom and NSA, and maybe that's going to be together or maybe it's going to be separated. And then it's also interesting in regards to that Supreme Court case that we talked about. Maybe that was Monday, but maybe that was last week, regarding tax information, digital information being shared, and whether or not our data could be considered our property or the property of the cloud-based computing companies that have held that data. And of course, they frame it in regard to the potential reauthorization next year of FISA Section 702. And finally, Luna said, my legislation will strip the deep state of these tools and protect every American's Fourth Amendment right against unreasonable searches and seizures. It's past time to rein in our intelligence agencies and restore the right to privacy. Anyone trying to convince you otherwise is using security as an excuse to erode your freedom. Good for you, Una Panoona. Okay, hold on a second. I'm seeing a lot of sirens in the chat. I think everything is working. It's certainly working on my end. Somebody is saying that I'm muted, but hopefully that was just much earlier. Are we good to go in the chat? You're concerning me a bit. Don't know what is happening. Wow. Something is going on with the sound. Can any of you hear me? Can we get a 5-5 or something? Just from in the beginning. Okay, good. All right. Thank you. Thank goodness. Okay, that was very concerning. Sorry for those of you listening on audio. Let us continue. So we have Una Panoona bringing up legislation to attempt to strike down the Patriot Act, something that has to go regardless. We also have the court case that may kind of dictate what level of access they're allowed to get from, to our data in the first place, based on whether or not it is considered to be owned by us or owned by one of the cloud computing companies. That's going to be a really interesting case to see how that turns out. Sorry, I was just a little shaken there by this whole muting problem. That would be terrible if I was muted for like that entire story. That would be awful. Anyhow, let us move forward and talk about another fairly funny character who I have just so much fun with. And I'm talking about one John Fettermen, or perhaps it's 6 or 7, John Fettermen. And he is in a bit of a, pardon me, let me pull this up. Now I'm all off my game. John Fettermen is the subject of many rumors now. Inside the divide, driving a wedge between John Fettermen and his quote-unquote missing wife, as his devastating decline is exposed. So John Fettermen, of course, is one of the fakest of the fake members of the House and Senate. There is no question about that. That dude could not even proceed through his campaign with the ability to hear or to speak and somehow still beat Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania has fake elections. Pennsylvania's had fake elections for a long time. Pennsylvania was one of the states stolen for Joe Biden in the 2020 fake election. And nothing has been done there to fix the elections. So Pennsylvania, too, has an entirely illegitimate government. And if people in Pennsylvania recognize that, maybe we'd be better off. But instead, we have Scott Pressler out there saying, we lost because Republicans didn't show up. Now, a funny note from this article is that Gisele is concerned about her husband's defense of Israel. So who knows how much importance that has in the scope of this story. But she had said, they are bombing refugee camps. How can you support this? She reportedly asked her husband this shortly after the paragliding go-kart incident. The Daily Mail article says Gisele's concerns over her husband's health are also on clear display in the New York Magazine profile, and that's the main story. In one bizarre instance, after a Fettermen staffer sent Gisele a text message saying, everyone here is feeling alarmed over his behavior, she replied, the doctor had also said that Fettermen was fighting to get access of the Twitter account. Please promise me that he'll never have access. I told him I don't want to talk to him until his blood is tested. All of this is so very weird, but here's the kicker. Here is the best part. In another instance, a former staffer recalled overhearing Gisele on speakerphone in December last year saying to Fettermen, who did I marry? Where is the man I married? Where indeed, Gisele? Where indeed? Where indeed is the original Fetterman? All we know now is that there are a number of Fettermen. And, I know it's a little crazy. I know it's the kind of stuff that people don't want to get down with. I get it. Makes me uncomfortable that people might be swapped out for stunt doubles or stroke doubles in this case. But there's 6 Fettermen right there. Are they all the same person? I would say no, that's not possible, that all these guys are the same Fetterman. Sorry, I just don't think it's true. Now, Fetterman, of course, was a COVID vaccine victim. Got to think that's what caused the stroke. To the extent any of it is real at all, it could just be a nonsense story. But also in 2022, when he was running for the Senate in a fake election, we had this version of Fetterman with this version of his neck. And it's always been hard to know what to make of any of it. We're almost done with the Fetterman segment. Don't worry. I just love Fetterman. I can't, I don't know what to say. This is the Citizen Free Press on X, formerly Twitter, from back in 2022. You might remember when he had this sit-down meeting with MSNBC, and he was reading the reporter's questions on this monitor and then responding. Now, if you have a problem with your hearing and you have to read on a computer or read off a computer, that's not a problem. And it might not be a problem for a senator if it was just that, but he also couldn't speak. Anyhow, he had this program communicating the questions from the MSNBC reporter, and here is her rundown of the event. If we can scroll back there. Okay,
we had a monitor set up so that he could read my questions because he still has lingering auditory processing issues as a result of the stroke, which means he has a hard time understanding what he's hearing. Now, once he reads the question, he's able to understand. You'll hear he also still has some problems, some challenges with speech. And I'll say, Katie, that just in some of the small talk prior to the interview, before the closed captioning was up and and running, it did seem that he had a hard time understanding our conversations. We have.
So understanding conversations is not exactly the same as being unable to hear. And I don't know if you remember the debate against Dr. Oz in 2022, but that was really something.
Mr. Fetterman, we begin with you. You suffered, as you mentioned a moment ago, a stroke 4 days before the May primary. Last week, you released this note from your doctor saying you can work full duty in public office, but you have not released your detailed medical records surrounding your stroke. Mr. Fetterman, will you pledge tonight to release those records in the interest of transparency? You have 60 seconds.
No. To me, for transparency is about showing up. I'm here today to have a debate. I have, speeches in front of 3,000 people in Montgomery County, all across Pennsylvania, big crowds. I believe if my doctor believes that I'm fit to serve, and that's what I believe is appropriate. And now with 2 weeks before the election, I have run a campaign and I've been very transparent about being very open about the fact we're in use captioning. And I believe that, again, my doctors, the real doctors that I believe in, they all believe that I'm ready to be served.
Follow up. I didn't hear you say you would release your full medical records. Why not? You have 30 seconds.
No, again, my doctor all believes that I'm fit to be serving, and that's what I believe is where I'm standing.
Okay, Mr.
So whatever that was. Anyhow, back to the missing wife, the estranged Fettermen and woman, Fetterwoman. One last little Fetterman clip here. This is from an interview with CNN's Manu Raju. Hold for processing. We are almost there. Here we are.
This New York Magazine story, what was your reaction to it?
Well, my reaction is it's a one source hit piece, and it involved maybe 2 or 3 anonymous disgruntled staffers saying just absolute false things or half-truths there.
The individual is a former chief of staff who has said that he's concerned about your well-being, which is why he went public. What do you say to someone like him who's concerned about? He says he's concerned about your.
Well, I mean, it's like now he's had a weird grudge, and he has threatened to do this for quite a while. And if you're really concerned about someone, you could say, hey, let's sit down. Can we talk? It's not like going to the media, and that's why somebody that has an agenda. It's like a hit piece.
You fully plan to serve your full term here in the Senate?
Come on, of course. That's obviously. Everybody understands I was treated for depression.
Yeah, and run for re-election.
We're not talking about 28. Who knows what's going to happen in 28? We never know what's in 28. But yes, it's May of 2025. It's like talking about 28.
He seems relatively cogent there. He's annoyed at Manu Raju, which means that he's kind of on point. I mean, Manu Raju is annoying. So I get it. But anyhow, I guess whichever Fetterman that is doing much better. Kudos to him for getting over the stroke. That was probably induced by the vaccine. Here is Thom Tillis yesterday, another illegitimate senator. This one from North Carolina. He has decided that he is not going to vote in committee to help with the nomination of Ed Martin, who Donald Trump has appointed to serve as U.S. Attorney for the District of D.C. And we'll talk about the District of D.C. in just a second.
He is, I don't believe he's being advanced to the markup. I met with Mr. Martin. He seems like a good man. Most of my concerns related to January 6th. And he built a compelling case on some of the 15-12 prosecutions that were probably heat of the moment bad decisions, but where we probably have a difference is I think anybody that breached the perimeter should have been in prison for some period of time. Whether it's 30 days or 3 years is debatable, but I have no tolerance for anybody who entered the building on January the 6th, and that's probably where most of the friction was.
I see. So he disagreed with you on that?
Well, no, I have to say that Mr. Martin did a good job of explaining how there were people that probably got caught up in it, but they made the stupid decision to come through a building that had been breached and that the police officers and others were saying stay away. So the difference wasn't that they should be charged, in my estimation, it's by how much. That's an argument I'm willing to have, but we have to be very, very clear that what happened on January the 6th was wrong. It wasn't, it was not prompted or created by other people to put those people in trouble. They made a stupid decision and they disgraced the United States by absolutely destroying the Capitol, and I can't have any patience for them.
It sounds like your concerns were not alleviated.
But let me be very clear, though. Mr. Martin did a good job of explaining the one area that I think he's probably right, that there were some people that were over-prosecuted. But there were some, 200 or 300 of them, that should have never gotten a pardon, and he agreed with that. But the disagreement there had more to do. If Mr. Martin were being put forth as a U.S. attorney for any district except the district where January 6th happened, the protest happened, I'd probably support him, but not in this district.
When you say he's not being advanced to the markup, was he operating under that understanding that he's not being advanced through to a markup?
Well, I think Mr. Martin, I'm sure they're looking through it. I mean, be clear, some of the deadline has to do with the length of time he can operate as acting, and the administration can work through that if they want to have more time and potentially work them through. But at this point, I've indicated to the White House I wouldn't support his nomination.
Has Trump called you yet?
So that's quite interesting. He says that he'd be happy to support Ed Martin if it were any other district. But because it's the Washington, D.C. district, he can't do it because of Ed Martin's views on what happened on January 6th and how he thinks that the J6ers should have been treated. That's quite an interesting stance to take. He would have gone along with whatever the president wanted, except in this case, because it's just too important. The District of Columbia's U.S. attorney position is just too important to leave it up to a guy like Ed Martin, who doesn't agree with the official story about J6. And by the way, the official story at this point also doesn't agree with the official story about J6 that was pushed out after J6, the one that Thom Tillis apparently still aligns with. So I asked ChatGPT, my surprisingly based version of ChatGPT, and I'll show you another example in just a second, by the way. I asked ChatGPT what the difference was, what was so special or extraordinary about the D.C. District Court relative to the other ones in the position of U.S. attorney. The D.C. U.S. attorney is the only one who functions as both a federal prosecutor and effectively the local district attorney. In most cases, local crimes are prosecuted by state-level district attorneys, but in D.C., a federal district with no state government, the U.S. attorney prosecutes both federal crimes and most local criminal cases, including homicides, assaults, and gun charges. Because D.C. is the seat of the federal government, the U.S. attorney there handles politically sensitive cases, crimes involving federal officials, January 6th related prosecutions, investigations into members of Congress or political appointees. This makes the role uniquely powerful in determining who gets prosecuted in Washington's political elite. So what does it mean for a man like Thom Tillis to be concerned that a guy who pretty much everybody agrees is a hard ass, Ed Martin, why is he so concerned that Ed Martin might be the U.S. attorney for the District of Columbia? Is he trying to get away with crimes? Is he trying to help other people get away with crimes? Ed Martin is suitable for other courts, just not the one that deals with political crimes in D.C.? It's awfully crazy. There are a couple other differences here. While U.S. attorneys are presidential appointees, the D.C. office is uniquely close to the Executive Power Center. The office often works in coordination with Main Justice, and its decisions often make national headlines. D.C. is not a state, therefore its prosecutor isn't elected by local citizens, but appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate, like all U.S. attorneys. This means residents of D.C. have no democratic control over their chief prosecutor, which is a constitutional oddity. It gives the federal executive branch outsized control over law enforcement in the Capitol, and some argue it violates the spirit of local self-governance. And so perhaps they want Trump to appoint, or Judge Boasberg to appoint, someone who's not going to go after political criminals in D.C. from the establishment. They go on. Historically, the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office has been a lever of political control used selectively for shielding allies, targeting dissidents, and controlling narratives in high-profile investigations. And it asked if I'd like a breakdown of examples where the office was used politically. And I said, what? Well, by all means, go ahead. And so it brought up Watergate, Iran-Contra, January 6th, selective non-prosecution, for example, Hillary Clinton's email server investigation. And they note, though technically it was handled by Maine DOJ and the FBI, any potential D.C.-based prosecution would have been routed through the U.S. Attorney's Office in the District of Columbia. Hunter Biden's business dealings it names as well. And this part I thought was particularly interesting. Targeting political outsiders and whistleblowers, and they bring up immediately, or not they, it brings up immediately Lieutenant General Michael Flynn. Mentions Project Veritas as well. And apparently James O'Keefe has some major bombshell release later today. It is said to be about Pam Bondi. I don't know if it's intentionally a takedown or if it's something that makes Pam Bondi look terrible and will cause a public attempt to remove Pam Bondi. But got to stay open to every possibility in these situations. We'll see it later on today, I suppose. There are efforts, we can see the efforts to take out people like Pete Hegseth. And Pam Bondi, she already has the Epstein files issue. Very mysterious on that. She came out today saying that the FBI was reviewing Epstein evidence, whether it's documents or videos, and she talked about some rather disgusting stuff and says they're working through all of that really difficult material, and then it's going to come out. So James O'Keefe has a Pam Bondi, Jeffrey Epstein related bombshell release later today. He said last week in a video that he posted online that he was not suicidal. Alex Jones has been backing all this up. That's his kill switch. If anything happens to James O'Keefe, then Alex Jones is going to run with it. It's a complex info op, if nothing else. And once you're already dealing with an info op, it doesn't necessarily make it a bad one, but there's a much higher chance that you're going to get hoodwinked. So watch for a rug, watch for any potential hoodwinking, and you never know. I mean, I think that James O'Keefe has been a great guy throughout this entire time. I'm a fan of James O'Keefe, but you never know. So, yeah, and then they mentioned the Ed Martin issue. All right. So all of that, I think, is very interesting. Thom Tillis is really putting himself on the line to make sure that Ed Martin will not be confirmed by the Senate as district attorney for the District of Columbia. Now, I guess it's possible that the Senate might go ahead and vote, even though Ed Martin wasn't cleared through the committee. And if that happens, then maybe Ed Martin will continue on in his role. But if that doesn't happen, then it goes to James Boasberg, the judge in the immigration cases, the guy that's knocking down Trump administration efforts left and right. That guy would be the one selecting one of the U.S. attorneys who's already been confirmed, apparently, to then serve as the U.S. attorney for the District of Columbia. And for that person to be removed, Trump would have to nominate someone new and have the Senate confirm that person. So this could just be a uniparty deep state attempt at keeping the person who could hold them accountable legally in the District of Columbia out of that position, and then nullifying that position and hopefully thwarting any efforts at accountability. It seems like that's where it's going. I don't know how that'll end up. And again, these things are all just waypoints to a goal that is much further along. And the achievement of that goal will not be deterred by any of these roadblocks. If they want to throw up roadblocks, then the whole point is to expose what they're doing and get the people on board so they understand exactly what the establishment uniparty strategy is. So we'll see how that goes. This was from today in the Wall Street Journal. Another Republican, a very weak Republican, is going to go against the Trump administration, this time on the big, beautiful bill, Trump's answer, I guess, to Build Back Better. A lot of money for a lot of stuff. And apparently there are also going to be some cuts as well. Tax bill imperiled by Trump's loud Republican critic. Representative Don Bacon has become known as a rare House Republican who regularly criticizes President Trump's actions. Now his vote could be crucial to Trump's tax plans. If you'll remember, a week or so ago, I think it was last Monday, we talked about Peter Thiel and how Peter Thiel was getting back in the game in terms of political donations, supporting political candidates. And there were 3 congressmen he was supporting: Don Bacon, Derek Van Orden, and Juan Ciscomani. So here's Bacon, one of those people, trying to thwart the big, beautiful bill. Now, I don't care if the big, beautiful bill passes, because the Congress is illegitimate and the money's fake and the war is against the global regime's fiat bankers. So the importance, again, of this individual issue is probably pretty low. But we're not going to be deterred from the end goal. Things are going to go as they're meant to go. But we can still judge the actions of these people and understand what these issues mean. Bacon, 61 years old, is on board with enacting money-saving work requirements on able-bodied users and more frequent eligibility checks for the health insurance program, which serves low-income and disabled people. They're referring to Medicaid. But while the House Energy and Commerce Committee is looking for nearly $900 billion in reductions over 10 years, largely from healthcare, Bacon says taking any more than $500 billion from Medicaid is too much. And he says some Republican leaders have privately tried to get him to drop his objections by saying any steep reductions passed by the House would be blocked by the Senate anyway. Well, that doesn't speak too well of the Senate, but it also doesn't speak too well of Don Bacon. $500 billion is okay. $900 billion is not okay. I wonder if there's a reason why one amount is acceptable and the other amount is not acceptable, or perhaps he thinks this is politically sellable as a quote-unquote centrist. He says that he feels like Republicans in the House are being pushed up to the edge of the cliff on these issues to pass the big, beautiful bill. During Trump's first 100-plus days, Bacon has spoken out against the administration over tariffs, how the U.S. has treated its allies, the president's statements about Ukraine, and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's handling of sensitive information on Signal, among other issues. He said he plans to vote against a Republican bill backing Trump's renaming the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America. Really? You can't even support that. After the Liberal Party staged a come-from-behind win in the Canadian elections, he quipped, "The president has made Liberals great again in Canada." So I guess he's upset that Canadian Ron DeSantis, Pierre Poilievre, was not elected in a fake election, when it was obvious that he would not be elected in that fake election. And what does Don Bacon care? I mean, why do American politicians care about what happens in Canada's fake elections. Does Don Bacon think that he's being elected in real elections? He can't possibly think that. And let's continue a little bit, and maybe we'll find out a little bit of why. But there's some interesting color in this article. When a news headline mentions a Republican objecting to something Trump has done, odds are it's Bacon. And some colleagues grumble he is too eager to engage with the press. Party leadership, quote, has asked me to try to tone it down a little bit, and I want to be respectful, he said. Asked if he is going to listen, Bacon replied with a laugh, well, I say I could do a lot more. I've been looking for opportunities not to have the opportunity. Okay? Who knows what that means? The former public affairs aide for General David Petraeus. Oh, okay. Well, now it's starting to make sense. I thought this was interesting down here as well. Representative Derek Van Orden of Wisconsin said Bacon, quote, is doing what he thinks he should be doing, representing his people. So that's 2 out of 3 Peter Thiel donation recipients in this article talking about how Don Bacon's doing a good thing. Don and Derek are on board. And then this I thought was great too. Trump went to his state in 2022 attacking Bacon as a bad guy. They say he's easily dispatched Republican challengers before narrowly beating Democrats. He jokes that he went from being attacked as a rhino commie Democrat to a right-wing Trump extremist in about one day. And that's awfully easy to do with fake elections. You first have a fake primary. And that's not even close. Everybody loves Don Bacon. Well, if you can't get that, then you move on to the general, and then it's really close because Nebraska is a conservative state. It was always a super red state, but now it's not super red because they have those different districts. I think they have 2 districts in Nebraska, and one of them is around the university. Every city in Nebraska is small, but the small cities where the universities are, the elections are always full Democrats, and they decide for the rest of the state. That has been the trend. And when you can fake elections in the only part of the state that matters, it doesn't really matter if the rest of the state is doing their elections well. There's no reason to believe the rest of the state is doing their elections well. But it's certainly not happening around the cities and the universities in those cities. We have a Rumble rant from Caramaga, $50. APL. Is that 2 of them? I think it's 2.
Panoona Banka. Panoona Banka.
I feel like I'm at an amusement park and it just rained, and so most people left. But the rain stopped, and then the rides reopened, and then you can just go on the best roller coasters over and over and over again. You get off it, you go right back in the line, you get right back on. And you just keep going. That's what it's like with Una Panoona. I hope other people have had that experience. Otherwise, I'm just going to sound crazy, which is fine. But let us continue. So why are these Republicans, that is the question, why are these Republicans not helping out the duly elected president? What is it they're going for? Who is their loyalty benefiting? It would sound like the deep state and not the president. So unfortunate. Let's talk about elections. This was Donald Trump on Truth Social yesterday. The election interfering 60 Minutes interview with Kamala Harris, which aired on CBS just before Election Day and deep into early voting, turned out to be much worse than expected, with her answers being unlawfully fixed, manipulated, and doctored throughout by CBS in order to try to make Kamala appear at least somewhat coherent. The full transcript, which 60 Minutes, CBS, and Paramount tried to hide from the American people and refused to release until after I was already inaugurated, and they were ordered to do so by the Federal Communications Commission, shows that the interview was nothing but fake, corrupt, anti-Trump propaganda. And he puts interview in quotes. On top of that, and a total slap in the face to anyone who believes in truth and honest journalism, this fake news puff piece has now been nominated for an award by the totally discredited Emmys. Did 60 Minutes and its corporate parents apply to get an Emmy for an illegally falsified interview? Or did other fake outlets nominate them for this dubious honor? These antics are why the American people have no trust in the press and demand that the media, very much including 60 Minutes, CBS, and its owners, be held responsible for their corruption and lies, which is exactly what we are doing in court. And today, Bernie Sanders and other Democrats were out there encouraging CBS Paramount not to settle with Donald Trump, saying that he would be rewarded for this frivolous lawsuit. It's an awfully bold claim that the lawsuit is frivolous. I mean, the case is made. I think that they probably don't want this to be considered election interference. I think this can be considered election interference. I think we're going to have to get to the point where we understand that the media's manipulation of public sentiment is interference in an election, especially when it's being when it's happening for the benefit of elements of the global regime that happen to be foreign. Then it takes on a whole new role. Now, the flip side of that is maybe it's just everybody's responsibility to not get hoodwinked by the media. And I understand that that's not going to happen right now, but we should be working in that direction. The government's not going to be able to fix these problems, and we can't run to a totally corrupted legal system every time something doesn't work out. Now, I have no doubt that they were editing that interview in manipulative ways specifically to interfere in the election. I totally get that. But the people have to be at some point responsible for the information they take in. We should be working toward that. It's not good enough to say that I was lied to by the television. Of course you're lied to by the television. That's what the television's for. Let us continue, though, with some election interference news. This is a disappointing obstacle on the path to a much better tomorrow. Fox News from yesterday, federal judge orders North Carolina to certify Supreme Court election results with Democrat leading. A federal judge on Monday ordered the North Carolina Elections Board to certify results showing Democrat Allison Riggs as the winner of the state Supreme Court race against Republican Jefferson Griffin, ruling that thousands of contested ballots in the November contest must remain in the final count. U.S. District Judge Richard Myers, who was appointed by President Trump in 2019, agreed with Riggs and others who argued it would violate the U.S. Constitution to carry out recent decisions by state appeals courts that could remove potentially thousands of ballots for overseas military and their family members who were not required to attach a copy of their photo IDs, as well as ballots for a category of never residents or U.S. citizens with family ties to North Carolina who have never lived in the United States. Myers wrote that votes could not be removed 6 months after Election Day without damaging due process or equal protection rights of the affected residents. That is a pretty broad ruling there. And here is what Myers said. The case concerns whether the federal Constitution permits a state to alter the rules of an election after the fact and apply those changes retroactively only a select group of voters, and in doing so treat those voters differently than other similarly situated individuals. The board must not proceed with implementation of the North Carolina Court of Appeals and Supreme Court's orders, and instead must certify the results of the election for the seat based on the tally at the completion of the canvassing period. So even though ballots that should not be counted were in the count, it has to be certified because according to the rules of the election at the time, according to this judge, these ballots didn't violate those rules. That's a pretty convoluted ruling. I guess it would then come down to the rules. And so that's the principle we have to focus on. Were these rules in place prior to the election? The judge seems to believe that they were. Were those rules set up in such a way that people who should not be eligible to vote would be allowed to vote? That the standards they would have to meet weren't part of the rules. The IDs weren't part of the rules. There are people who never lived in North Carolina whose votes are tallied for that win, and apparently it doesn't matter. Now, sticking with North Carolina for a second, let's kind of retreat back to Tillis for a moment. Mike Benz was on War Room yesterday talking about the Thom Tillis situation, and the clip's about 5 minutes long. I don't know that we're going to go through the whole thing, but let's take just a quick listen to some of it.
To me, it gets very dark. Thom Tillis has made precisely one public statement about this to the press, and that was just this morning, where he said it was January 6th that is the reason that he is not going to approve Ed Martin. And obviously, January 6th was a Fedsurrection. January 6th also happened, checks notes, four years and 4 months ago? It has no play today. Everyone who did not commit a violent crime that day has been pardoned by the President of the United States. There are no active cases when it comes to peaceful protesters. This is not just an ancient memory. It's settled. It's done. For that to be invoked as the reason to block Ed Martin suggests something much darker to me. Because if you actually parse that statement that Senator Thom Tillis said, he mentions towards the end of his remarks that he was apprehensive about Ed Martin pursuing a Fedsurrection theory of the case. He alludes to the fact that he says that there was no federal involvement. That was a sort of pipe dream. I'm paraphrasing what he says. And he slips that in there, and I find that very curious because he's a senator from North Carolina. And North Carolina is the heart of the, shall we say, Mark Milley deep state when it comes to all things psychological operations, domestic, a very nasty history of domestic interference in domestic politics.
Well, and North Ralph Barrick at UNC Chapel Hill doing the COVID gain of function stuff. Mike, if you can hang with us through the break, possibly we're also going to have AG Ken Paxton joining us shortly.
Now, that's quite something. North Carolina is the heart of the deep state and its psychological operations. And I think that he is referring to, Mike Benz is referring to Fort Liberty in North Carolina. It used to be Fort Bragg. And at that base, the 4th Psychological Operations Group is housed, as is the 8th Psychological Operations Group, and the U.S. Army Civil Affairs and Psychological Operations Command. So, to say that that is the heart of psychological operations in the United States for the United States military is probably quite accurate. I don't know if those psychological operations are being led on behalf of the deep state that Mike Benz and myself and probably all of you are extremely worried about. I'm not exactly sure that's the case, although it could be, because, of course, we're just in an era of only psyops, and the real indicator is not whether the psyop is being run for our benefit or maliciously. It's how we react to it, regardless of who's leading the psyop. It's our responsibility. Same thing with the media. It's our responsibility to discern the truth. We can't just put it off on someone else. The psychological operations can only work if we're still believing the things that come to us through our screens, through the television, however many versions of the television you might be consuming. You're consuming the television on TV. You're consuming it in newspapers. You're consuming it through most of what you take in your phone. It's all the same thing. It is just the messaging of the regime being pushed out to make sure that everyone sees it and reacts in the recommended fashion. It's not always branded to the same people. There's not only one message. There's lots of messages. But the point is, you brand those messages to a whole range of people and expect that that whole range of people is going to respond in the appropriate way. By battling one another over details while the underlying purpose is just Trojan horsed through. And so, again, it's our responsibility to be able to reject these psyops. The best way to do that is by understanding that psyops are happening all the time and analyzing first as a psyop rather than trying to understand what really happened. Because in many cases, nothing really happened. And we're going to talk about potentially some examples of that later on today. Let us move forward. We're going to go back to election stuff. This is Colorado, some happier election fraud related news. And again, just to put a cap on that story about the North Carolina judges, if that gets appealed, and it could, I don't know that it will, but if that gets appealed, then that's going to be a very interesting argument before the Supreme Court. I hope we get there. I don't know that we're going to get there, but I hope we do, because it would be great to have a ruling on the status of the election rules that are in place for the election, despite the fact that the rules themselves are and should be violations of state constitutions, federal law, etc. If your rules are set up to allow a bunch of fake voters, and then it's proven that the rules are that sort of illegitimate, who should be appointed to serve in the seat as a result? Let us move to Colorado. Former Colorado postal employee admits to stealing ballots ahead of 2024 election. This is Colorado Public Radio, CPR.org. One of the women accused of stealing and fraudulently casting more than a dozen ballots ahead of last November's election pleaded guilty Monday. Vicky Stewart, 64, was charged with 34 counts related to the ballot theft scheme, which occurred in the lead up to last year's presidential election. She pleaded guilty to 1 count of identity theft and 1 count of forgery in the 21st Judicial District Court. Stewart was charged in November with counts that included forgery, identity theft, and attempts to influence a public servant. According to the arrest affidavit, Stewart and another woman stole more than a dozen ballots from Mesa County residents before they could be delivered to the intended voters. The goal, prosecutors said, was to test the state's voting safeguards. The scheme was uncovered when some voters alerted authorities after the Colorado ballot tracking system informed them their ballots were being processed even though they hadn't received their ballots yet. State officials said 3 of the stolen ballots that were cast fraudulently did make it through the signature verification process and were counted as legitimate votes. At the time of the theft, Stewart was working as a U.S. Postal Service employee in Grand Junction with direct access to ballots that had been sent in the mail in October 2024. So, a couple interesting things here. First and foremost, this is the 2024 election, and there is election fraud in Colorado, a scheme to commit election fraud. Now, this article, what it's describing, is on a small scale. It's not the widespread election fraud that we have been discussing for many years. This is Mesa County. This is where Clerk Tina Peters was working. And we don't have to get into all that, although Trump made a very powerful statement to free Tina Peters just a couple of days ago on Truth Social, and mentioned a judge who seems to have a pretty shady past. Seems like a pervert. I haven't looked deeply into that, but might be worth a peek. So this is happening in Colorado on a small scale as described in this article, but it's a scheme by postal workers to steal ballots before they've been delivered, obviously, to their intended recipients, and then cast votes on those ballots. So they've been caught with, quote unquote, more than a dozen. Who knows how many that is? Some of those were entered into the official count. But how many others were there? And how many other places was this scheme operating? I remember this sort of thing happening all the way back in 2020. especially in a place like California, where I knew people who were receiving multiple ballots in the mail, which is something that clearly should not happen. And if that situation was happening and the postal workers could be somehow made aware of which ballots were duplicates or which ballots would probably never reach their intended recipients, well, all those ballots could be captured and voted and processed and counted without a voter ever having received the ballot. And so the voters who don't receive their ballots and understand that a vote is being processed in their name, well, they can actually speak up and do something because they recognize the problem. But if ballots are being sent out in the mail to people who don't exist, people who moved out, people at different addresses, or even duplicate ballots to totally eligible voters, and all of those are cast or captured and cast, well, then we have widespread election fraud. And so this is an example in microcosm, but could be a much, much larger issue. And we're going to have to see how these things play out. I expect we're probably going to have this sort of thing coming into the news many times over the next few months. I hope that's the case. Obviously, I've been too optimistic about disclosure on election fraud stuff before. But the idea that these are all isolated incidents when they're postal workers operating within a scheme that immediately understanding the scheme and the purpose of these schemes could be much broader. I think that that's a good sign. We're getting some of the news in that direction. By the way, EC was here over in the Substack chat. Just let me know that it's Fort Bragg again, just named after a different Bragg. And I do remember that story. So thank you for the correction. Here is another story, another positive story about the pursuit of election integrity. This is Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton on X, formerly Twitter. Breaking, I'm announcing 6 indictments and arrests in Frio County for an illegal vote harvesting scheme. The people of Texas deserve fair and honest elections, not backroom deals and political insiders rigging the system. Well, thank you, Ken Paxton, but the system is long since rigged, and elections in Texas are totally illegitimate, which is why Texas, the very, very red state, actually operates like a very, very blue state, fully and wholly captured by foreign entities and corporate interests, and beset with people with little R's next to their name who actually act no different than the people with little D's next to their name. This is from the Attorney General official website, texasattorneygeneral.gov. This is the press release on this very story. Attorney General Ken Paxton announced the indictments and arrests of 6 people, including several public officials, for election crimes related to a vote harvesting scheme in Frio County. And so again, we are talking about coordination from people who are directly involved with elections. In the last example, we had coordination among people who were directly involved in the dissemination of ballots. And of course, they're doing other things as well, but that makes them directly involved in the elections. And then they have to process the ballots in the return and the rest of it. They have to be responsible for the postmarks, which indicate what date the ballot was sent out, which if the states actually adhered to what the Constitution demands, the dating on those ballots would be hugely important. It's less so when the states don't care. But we're talking about people who are directly involved with our elections and can dictate their legitimacy based on their positions. They're in positions of public trust relative to our elections. The people of Texas deserve fair and honest elections, not backroom deals from political insiders. We read that quote, same as he posted on X, formerly Twitter. In August 2024, Attorney General Paxton's Criminal Investigation Division executed multiple search warrants in Frio, Atascosa and Bexar counties as part of a multi-year election integrity investigation into credible allegations of vote harvesting. On May 1st, 2025, Frio County District Attorney Audrey Lewis and the Election Integrity Unit of the Office of the Attorney General presented a criminal vote harvesting case to a grand jury in Frio County. The grand jury returned true bills for the following indictments. Frio County Judge Rochelle Camacho, 3 counts of vote harvesting. Former Frio County Elections Administrator Carlos Segura, 1 count of tampering with or fabricating physical evidence. Pearsall City Council Ramiro Trevino, 1 count of vote harvesting. Pearsall City Council Rachel Garza, 1 count of vote harvesting. Pearsall ISD trustee, so that's the school, Adrian Ramirez, 3 counts of vote harvesting, and alleged Frio County vote harvester Rosa Rodriguez, 2 counts of vote harvesting. Each suspect was arrested on May 2nd, with the exception of Camacho, who will be processed at a later date. This is Attorney General Ken Paxton's Election Integrity Unit. They will continue to investigate. That is a big deal as far as I'm concerned. These 2 stories are both big deals, not because they in themselves will get us all the way there, but because they are showing the system and the involvement of people within the system manipulating, influencing, rigging elections in this country all the way up to 2024. So, for all of those people who determined that our elections were fixed because Donald Trump won, well, sorry, guys. That was never going to be true. At any point, there was no chance that could possibly be true. And we were still led to believe that by a great many truthers. Isn't that strange? And of course, it gets harder for them to admit that our elections are fake because, A, they're already talking about the midterms because that's part of the normie conversation on Twitter. And a lot of people in the truth community want to be big on Twitter. They want to be big on Instagram. They want to be influencers and get paid to be influencers. They don't care so much about the truther part. They're just political influencers, no different than the people downstream from Charlie Kirk. And to be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if some of them were downstream from Charlie Kirk or other various info ops when they're, where they get paid to post. What is it going to take for people to realize that elections are fake and the public officials are illegitimate? We have to reach that point at some point. And it's strange that truthers are not helping. Although if they did do that, they would then have to admit that they were not only wrong in the struggle sessions and all of the nonsense about voting as hard as possible last year, they were actually lying to their audiences because their publicly acknowledged motivation was to not discourage anyone from voting in a fake election, concerned over whether or not they would win the fake election. And winning a fake election is meaningless. Donald Trump has a clear, obvious, and overwhelming majority, and I don't really believe Donald Trump ever left. So I'm not concerned about Donald Trump's legitimacy, but the rest of them have no legitimacy. These elections are fake. We have to get there at some point, but they don't want to admit that they lied to their audience, and they continue to lie to their audience because lying to the audience is part of the whole thing for these influencers. Trust the plan. That's all there is. Trust Trump. That's all there is, no matter what happens. And they will lie and tell people not to bring up certain subjects, worried that if those subjects are addressed, all of a sudden people are going to lose faith in the plan or lose faith in Trump. Have I said anything at any point that has caused people to lose faith in Trump or what Trump is doing? I don't think that claim could be made with any reliability whatsoever. And the fact that they've lost the one issue where they were making it concerning our fake elections kind of eliminates that possibility. So then why do we have to say the thing that everybody else has decided they're going to say when those things they're saying are always aligned with the normie takes and the Fox News, the mainstream on the right, which is actually just the left. And of course, again, these people want their solutions to come from government. That is groveling, okay? They are statists. You can't be a statist on the right. You can only be a statist on the left. It's crazy that the truth community is so infested with statists and grovelers, but it's nonetheless true. John in Connecticut, $10 over on Rumble. Another fantastic show I need to finish later. Thanks, Chris. Well, thank you, John. Okay. Let us continue. We talked about Signalgate and Mike Waltz's reemergence as the key figure in Signalgate because last week he was photographed using an Israeli cloned version of Signal. And this is quite an interesting update, if you ask me. CNBC from a couple days ago. I missed this on Monday. Or I guess it came out after I'd already started the show. Messaging app used by Trump officials suspends operations after reported hack. Well, that's pretty severe. An encrypted messaging app that President Donald Trump's then National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz, used during a cabinet meeting last week has temporarily suspended service after it was reportedly hacked. The hacker of Telemessage, an Israel-founded app that acts as a modified version of Signal, has not obtained the messages of Waltz or the people he spoke to, according to 404 Media, which first reported the cyber attack Sunday. So the hacker doesn't have Waltz's messages. Don't worry about that. But the reported breach nevertheless raises questions about whether the app that lets clients archive messages for compliance purposes, which top government officials appear to be using, is secure. Now, that's very interesting. So Signal has messages that can be set to disappear, but they are being archived using this app anyway, and it's claimed that that is for compliance purposes. Again, you have to remember the very strange dynamic where the media has begun to kind of defend Mike Waltz. He's one of the traditionalists. He's one of the people that still want to go to war with the old enemies and run the neocon playbook over and over and over again. So they've started to defend him. Is the claim going to be that Waltz was using this Israeli clone Signal app, Telemessage, to archive those conversations for compliance? It's very interesting. Is Mike Waltz, and here's a potential good thing for Mike Waltz, is Mike Waltz tasked with archiving these messages because he's on some Signal text thread where people are using the disappearing messages feature to avoid accountability for the things that they're saying? That would be a very interesting revelation, which is why it's always important to keep an open mind about all these things. But it appears to be the case that Mike Waltz was using an app that could easily be accessed, and now we're hearing that it was, quote unquote, hacked. Telemessage is investigating a potential security incident. A spokesperson for Smarsh, which runs the app, told CNBC in a statement, upon detection, we acted quickly to contain it and engaged an external cybersecurity firm to support our investigation. Out of an abundance of caution, all telemessage services have been temporarily suspended. All other Smarsh products and services remain fully operational. Data stolen by the hacker includes the contents of messages sent using Telemessage's versions of Signal, WhatsApp, Telegram, and WeChat, 404 Media reported. That's a lot. Now, when you're thinking about these issues, actually, let's close this out and then let's do this paragraph. I want to talk about the other thing separately. Taking a secure messaging application and changing a core functionality, such as backing up messages, essentially breaks the security model this guy, Richard, said he's part of a security firm called Black Duck. This creates a security risk for users of the application as their sensitive information could be and has been compromised. Okay. So they have access to all these various apps that telemessage can clone and then archive messages that are meant to appear or disappear, rather, on other apps. And we are told that a hacker was able to get in and steal their data. Amazing timing that the hacker gets in there right as the Mike Waltz stuff is happening. Now, you might say that the hacker went in and accessed this information to attempt to get Mike Waltz's information. Maybe that's what happened. Maybe there's a real hack. When I'm hearing that there's some kind of hack, I generally assume that no, that didn't happen. And what we're getting is a cover story for why data was exposed. So it's not that Mike Waltz made an error and that this app is totally compromised inherently by a foreign intelligence organization. It's that a hacker got the stuff. We'll see how this stuff pans out in the future, but man, oh man, it's hard to take these stories seriously when you understand the stakes and you understand the machinations. It's very, very easy to say you were hacked. You know, we've heard about cyber attacks shutting down pipelines, etc. We've talked about this many times. There's no reason to believe the mainstream story. If something can be done with the flip of a switch or by people with interest in doing that thing who already have access to the systems, it should first be assumed that they are responsible, not that the stories about a cyber attack or a hack are actually true. Because then the blame is shifted from the people who may very well be responsible and the most likely to benefit, the cui bono principle. It seems like the people most likely to benefit would be the people with access, compromised access to the messages on all these various platforms. If it's being brought out into the light, they want to create a cover story, a possible other explanation, and then shut the system down as quickly as possible. And that's exactly what's happened. All right. Pausing for a second to take a peek at the chat. Hope everybody's good. All right, we're going to keep going here. Going to go into the geopolitical realm, and then we'll get into the real globalist realm. So we are now being told that there is going to be a war, apparently, between India and Pakistan, or that war is already happening. And whenever it comes to kinetic conflict, my first thought is always, that's probably fake. And my second thought is, if there is kinetic conflict, understanding through the good twin, evil twin lens, that it's not country against country. It's sovereign nationalist factions within all countries against the globalist, one world, liberal, rules-based, order-oriented regime factions in those same countries. Okay? And so then it becomes, who is in control of the militaries launching these strikes to the extent that they are real strikes, and who actually uses the targets of those strikes in the cases where the target is a facility. And I think we have to examine everything that happens on a geopolitical scale in that way. It's not good enough to say India did this to Pakistan. That is nonsense. All right. We talked about this, I think, the other day, or maybe I was just talking about it online. But it would be ridiculous to assert, and we're going to actually see this later in the Maduro thing. That's what it was. I mentioned it online. It would be ridiculous to blame Donald Trump for things that Adam Schiff did, right? It'd be ridiculous to blame Donald Trump for things that Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama did. It would be ridiculous to suggest that the United States is looking to pass a law for XYZ because Fake President Joe Biden and the illegitimate Congress serving under him were passing legislation. That's not the United States doing that. That's the evil twin faction doing all of those things. Okay? And so you have to be able to separate them. And we understand the principle as it applies here. We separate them with our understanding here. And so once you've done that, you immediately have to export that abroad and understand these issues through that same lens. Otherwise, it's just total nonsense. So this is Badlands Media from today. India-Pakistan conflict escalates with deadly strikes and downed warplanes. India and Pakistan are facing their most direct military confrontation since 2019 after Indian warplanes carried out deadly strikes inside Pakistan on Wednesday. Islamabad claims to have downed 5 Indian jet fighters in response, including French-made Rafales and Rafale. I don't know how you say that in French. And released footage of smoke rising from what it said was one of the crash sites. Oh, footage of smoke rising from a place they called a crash site. The Indian government has yet to respond to those claims, which could not be independently verified. But we have to believe them because there's a run-up to a new war, and we have to believe that there's going to be a new war. And then we're going to take sides in that war, even while India is negotiating over trade deals and negotiating with their regional partners in Russia and China, for instance, even though they're also our partners and our BFFs, except for, that bad guy Modi, as we were kind of framed to believe during the fake and illegitimate Biden administration and in the coverage of India's elections last year, which I covered at length on this podcast. I think we did an entire episode or maybe 2 episodes on the Indian elections last year. But Modi is clearly a very good friend of Donald Trump. They have a great relationship. And so the idea that India is just going rogue over what we were told is a terrorist incident a week or 2 ago seems to me to be just too much to believe. Let's get through a little more of this. India said its strikes did not target Pakistani military sites, but were in retaliation for last month's militant attack in Indian-administered Kashmir that left 26 dead, including 25 Indians and 1 Nepali citizen. The attack occurred in Pahalgam, I hope I'm saying that correctly, a tourist destination, and was the deadliest against Indian civilians since the 2008 Mumbai attacks. India has linked the assault to Pakistan, a claim Islamabad denies. Okay, so a terrorist incident. Who's responsible, generally speaking, for terrorist incidents? Global regime, intelligence agencies, and their private armies, which are drug cartels and terrorist organizations. So already the idea that India, under Modi, is going to be attacking Pakistan, which says they had nothing to do with it, is a little crazy. This is exactly the framing that we are accustomed to when neocons and regime warmongers are selling new wars. Why would we believe it in this instance? And it's funny because I think it's very much like the Afghanistan exit, that op that we were shown on TV. Again, not saying the whole thing's an op and that the whole thing's fake, but also kind of. It's entirely possible that American soldiers were attacked by quote unquote terrorists and killed. So I'm not denying that. I'm not trying to deny anyone's pain, but we also saw what looks to be an inflatable plane going down the runway in one of the most ridiculous pieces of video I've ever watched in my life. That was supposed to be the last train out of Kabul, and you have effeminate Afghan teenagers waving their arms and smiling as they ran alongside the plane. If you believe all right, I think maybe we're back. Geez, what a strange day. What a strange day. All right, so that was a funny time for things to drop out. I'm just making sure Telegram people, or Substack people know that I'm back over there. So we were just talking about the plane leaving Afghanistan and how ridiculous all of that looked. And as soon as you see something that ridiculous, you immediately should take steps back from the story and be like, okay, well, something's a little off about this story. That's ridiculous. What I just saw is ridiculous. Ridiculous. You're telling me that is what happened? That plane? I mean, that was on Fox News. I remember it on Tucker Carlson. It's on all the news sites. That exit from Kabul. That's the last plane out. It wasn't the last plane out. It also wasn't the plane. That was one of the most ridiculous things I've ever seen. We saw all sorts of fake stuff at the beginning of the Ukraine war. We had the paragliding go-kart incident. At some point, you just gotta step back. All right? It's not about, you gotta call it fake. I'll call it fake. You can let people yell at me if you're not comfortable saying those kinds of things and you don't want people to yell at you. And then we'll just find out who's right over time. Has there been any reason at any point since then to believe that those stories happened as told and as shown? No, of course not. They can't add to those stories and make them more real. They try to, but the way they do it is by trying to increase the emotional impact, to increase the stories about the tragedies so that the penalty, the social penalty for calling these things out is increased. And eventually you just have to stop caring about the social penalties. But this incident that they're talking about in Kashmir, I don't know, 10 days ago or whatever it was, there was video of the incident, and it's like a zip line. Let me see if I can find this. I don't know if I'm going to be able to find this. But the craziest video, this tourist is on a zip line going across a field. Here we are. I'll show you this. This is so ridiculous that I have a very hard time thinking anything about this situation is real. Here we are. So that right there is how you know that the incident was real. And I really do hope that was up on the screen. I'm so worried about the production at this point. So what you just saw there was a tourist in this tourist destination in Kashmir riding across a field on a zip line, and then you begin to hear gunshots and see people running away. Now, is that the sort of thing that can be faked? The answer is absolutely yes. Okay? That is just the sort of thing that absolutely can be fake or staged. Okay? And so I think that part goes without saying, and we don't really have to get into it. And I'm not even saying that all this is fake. Okay? That is me. That would be me making a positive assertion about something I don't know to be true. And I try to never do that. Not probably always successful, but I try not to do that. What I can say is that is a wild video, considering what it's showing, and you just have a guy on a zip line like yeeing the whole time. I don't know what sound that was. I guess he was having a lot of fun, or he wanted to communicate that he was having a lot of fun to his followers. I'm sure there are many, many of them. When you see something like that, and that's the proof that the incident happened, you got to back off a couple steps and say, I'm going to just take a different approach to this story. And it's funny, we heard the proof they had. It's unverifiable. It's from video of smoke rising. I remember having it, someone trying to show me up in a live event on the basis that satellite images from European NASA showed the reality of an Israeli strike. European NASA. They captured it from space. You see those black marks on the middle of that sand around those roads? That's what makes it real. You can't suggest it might be fake. It's real. Same people believe the paragliding go-kart incident and all of the atrocity stories that followed the paragliding go-kart incident. If you believe that stuff, you can believe it. I don't know why you do. I know the social pressure. I get it. You have to say all this is real. And it's funny, too, because the people in the pro-Hitler op and the extreme anti-Jewish movement, they never talk about how the paragliding go-kart incident is obviously bullshit. It's not possible for paragliding go-karts to float over the border, the most insanely secured border in the history of the world, and then slaughter and rape people with a year's advanced warning. But that doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. People are unwilling to think for themselves. And again, they're trying to be acceptable to the normie sphere. They don't want to be conspiracy theorists. They don't want to be calling things fake because you can't take those people seriously if you're in the mainstream. And so if you want to be in the mainstream, if you're just an establishment Republican at heart or truly a neocon, and your goal is to be an influencer and be taken seriously by the people you think are serious, well, then you're not going to explore these possibilities. And I guess it's just about everyone's goals, ultimately. But we don't have to respect them. I certainly don't. All right, let us continue. So anyway, the bottom line on that is that I guess we're about to have a nuclear war. And the article mentions at the end, of course, the two nuclear-armed nations have maintained a fragile ceasefire since 2021. That truce now appears to be collapsing under the weight of renewed violence. And so, again, the nuclear weapon, everyone's gonna die op rears its head. This is what makes it so important. You can't afford not to take this story seriously because of the emotional impact, because these poor innocent people were killed, and because nuclear weapons are involved. Sooner or later, you gotta opt out. That was corny. All right, let's go to the Times of Israel from Monday. 20 Israeli fighter jets strike in Yemen after Houthi missile hits Ben Gurion Airport. And I just want to capture a couple pieces of this. The Israel Defense, I think it's Israeli Defense Forces, and the Hodeidah port, said the Hodeidah port was used by the Houthis for the transfer of Iranian weapons, equipment for military needs, and other terror purposes. So the Houthis are being conflated with Iran, and we're told that they are funded by Iran. Now, that doesn't quite make much sense in the good twin, evil twin paradigm. It only makes sense through the neocon, normie, regime establishment paradigm where Iran are the bad guys. There aren't factions within Iran. Iran can't be used as an avatar. It's just that Iran are the bad guys. They are funding the Houthis. Therefore, they're the same thing. And the Houthis here were transferring Iranian weapons. That's justifying the Israeli strike. The Bajil concrete factory, quote, serves as an important economic resource for the Houthi terror regime and is used for building tunnels and military infrastructure, the IDF said, adding that the strikes, quote, constitute a blow to the regime's economy and its military buildup. So the Houthis are building tunnels? I know that there are other places with tunnels. Pretty sure that Israel's one of them. And of course, then we had the whole thing about the tunnels in New York City. That was very weird. The strike was conducted, but to talk about that is anti-Semitic. The strike was conducted in response to the repeated attacks by the Houthi terrorist regime against the state of Israel, during which surface-to-surface missiles and UAVs were launched toward Israeli territory and its civilians, the military said in a statement. Okay, so that's the Israeli side of the case. Now we need to hear what attack they're responding to. And here it is. Nasruddin Amer, head of the Houthi media office, later said the Israeli strikes would not deter the rebels and vowed that they would respond to the attack. And of course, you got to save face. We've talked about saving face before on the podcast. One side gets a story about an attack. The other side gets a story about their response to the attack, and it goes back and forth. And we had those all throughout last year. We would hear that some U.S. target was struck by this or that terrorist group. That means that we have to respond to something else. It's always 3 people were hurt or something. It's always an attack that was right near the target, but just missed slightly. Same man says the aggressive Zionist American raids on civilian facilities will not affect our military operations against the Zionist enemy entity. That's very interesting. Monday's strikes came after a missile fired from Yemen on Sunday landed inside the perimeter of Ben Gurion Airport near Tel Aviv for the first time in a grove of trees alongside an access road close to the airport's main Terminal 3, several hundred yards from the facility's control tower. So the attack they're responding to didn't actually hit anything. The missile, and I am overstating it because we're about to hear that it did totally hit something. The missile gouged a wide crater in the ground near an airport parking lot, injuring 6 people, none of them seriously, and prompting most international airlines to suspend flights. So there you have it. It's just like a bomb scare. Somebody calls in a bomb scare. The hotel is evacuated. The police are brought in. Therefore, it was a real bomb scare. We used that example with, I can't remember what the group was called. They had an event a few months ago. Norm Eisen was one of the attendees, all neocons besides that. But we were led to believe that MAGA extremists were attacking this group because they're anti-Trump. It's very easy to make the claim. All you need then is some sort of real-world reaction to the claim, and that indicates to everyone that it was real. So you have 6 injured people, none seriously. We're going to have to accept that. That's the emotional stakes. That's the cost of this attack. And they suspended international flights, which makes the whole thing real. Does that have to be real? No, that doesn't have to be real at all. To the extent that it's real, who's to say it wasn't just a false flag attack, as we are now accustomed to? All of these things. I wish we lived in a different information world, right? I wish we lived in the world where the things we were told by the television were actually true and we could trust them and we could just go off that information and we wouldn't have to consider, hey, maybe this is a false flag. Hey, maybe nothing happened in the first place. Hey, to the extent an attack happened, maybe it was just a face-saving attack that was meant to strike nothing. And we've seen Donald Trump do that. And we've seen Donald Trump talk about doing that. He used to say in his rally speeches, he would talk to, I want to say it was the Iranians, but I could be wrong about it. I don't want to, don't quote me on who exactly it was, but I'm pretty sure it was Iran. Was it Syria? Anyhow, he would talk about how he needs to strike back and therefore he's going to damage something close to one of their bases. He's talked about these deals. Oh, we hit you, now you get to hit us. And you remember there was a story about how American military personnel had their hearing blown out and maybe traumatic brain injury or something from a missile attack that landed far from their base. That, again, is the cost of Trump saying and doing these sorts of things. Why would they use cover stories to protect their motivations? Well, because if the real story comes out that nothing actually happened, or if we are led to understand that these things are just face-saving operations so that each country can seem like they are strong and standing up for themselves, well, then you take away some of the narrative pillars of how the warmonger machine operates. I think that we have a potential example of that here. And I think that that's especially interesting because, so that was Monday. And then yesterday, we get this. And by the way, those attacks on the Houthis by Israel, we are told, happened with the United States permission. The U.S. was there as a backup in case anything went wrong. The U.S. military would be involved. That's what's been reported. But then Trump says this yesterday. Trump announces U.S. will stop bombing Houthis. The United States will stop strikes against Yemen's Houthi group, President Donald Trump announced Tuesday after a nearly 2-month bombing campaign. And you might remember, when I covered Signalgate and the Jeffrey Goldberg article in The Atlantic that exposed Signalgate, I said one thing is definitely going to be believed after this event, and that's that we're bombing the Houthis, okay? Because it's being discussed in a private conversation, then we were told about it in media reports, therefore, that definitely happened. And now we're seeing an example of Israel bombing the Houthis with the U.S.'s backup at the same time that President Trump has said we're not going to bomb the Houthis. Trump, ahead of a meeting with Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, said the halt would start immediately. The Houthis approached the administration on Monday night, indicating they want to stop the fighting, he said. The military has struck at least 800 targets in Yemen and killed hundreds of Houthis since March, according to U.S. Central Command. Trump framed the move as a handshake agreement to end the Pentagon's bombing campaign in exchange for the Houthis no longer attacking American ships. It's not a deal, he said. They said, please don't bomb us anymore, and we're not going to attack your ships. So would it make sense then that Israel is attacking the Houthis with U.S. backup just one day before? The Houthis came to Trump Monday night after that Israeli attack and said, please, sir, no more. Stop bombing us and we'll stop bombing you. It's a lot to accept. It really is. I mean, these are military intelligence operations and regime-oriented military intelligence and intelligence agencies feeding stories to the mainstream press all across the world, all part of the same global regime's propaganda media apparatus. And yet we're supposed to believe all these things. But let's keep going. Omani Foreign Minister Badr al-Busaidi confirmed on the social media platform X, formerly Twitter, that his country mediated talks between the Houthis and the U.S. In the future, neither side will target the other, including American vessels in the Red Sea and Bab al-Mandab Strait, ensuring freedom of navigation and the smooth flow of international commercial shipping, he wrote. Mohammed al-Bukaidi, a senior Houthi official, told Bloomberg News that the group would stop attacking military ships if Washington halts its strikes. But we will definitely continue our operations in support to Gaza. So crazy. On my end, another technical issue. And I hope that we are doing okay here. It's very strange. My monitor just shit the bed, you might say. Well, let's get back to the story. He said Houthi operations would continue until the end of aggression on Gaza and the blockade on its people. That's going to be a long time, I guess. I mean, who knows where those negotiations are at this point? We have been hearing from the neocons and the warmongers and the traditionalists and the establishment Republican types that Israel is going to have to go to war with Iran. While Trump has been continually saying that Iran must be prevented from getting a nuclear weapon, which is going to be really easy because there's no way that's going to happen. Not possible. But they can have nuclear power. The regime would be against Iran having nuclear power, one would think. And nuclear power brings in a whole range of other possibilities for next generation technology, et cetera. That seems to be one of the macro trends where we're going right now. And Donald Trump wants to get some sort of deal with the Iranians and perhaps a new example of the Abraham Accords. And I think my pal, Ghost of Base Patrick Henry, has been all over that. But I believe, if I'm not mistaken, we had an example of Donald Trump. Maybe I just found it and showed it to him last week. I can't locate it quickly right now. But where Donald Trump talked about the Abraham Accords in one of those Oval Office sit-downs with a foreign leader and suggested strongly that there would be more of those to come in the future. And I think that that's a very big deal. And I'm not certain, obviously, that it's going to be with Iran, but Trump is headed to the Middle East over the weekend or perhaps early next week. I don't know the exact date on that. I know his meetings are on Monday, but he's going to go over there to talk with the Saudis, et cetera. Is there another Abraham Accord being set up? And will that Abraham Accord, which normalizes relations with Israel, be the country that the neocons and warmongers in the global regime are telling us Israel must attack? Houthis are carrying Iranian weapons. What are these claims going to look like in a couple of days if it happens to be an announcement on the Abraham Accords? And let's just, before we get there, let's just hear Donald Trump talking about the Houthis yesterday.
Are you planning to ease chip export restrictions to some of these Gulf countries and then also make announcements regarding...
We might be doing that, yeah.
And their nuclear programs, civilian nuclear programs?
And it'll be announced soon.
You're going to help them develop some nuclear power?
Well, we're going to take a look. But, we had really a very good, as you know, we had a very good outcome with the Houthis, and we honor their word. I mean, they made a commitment, and we dealt with other countries that were close to them and their surrogates, and we honor all of their words. We'll see what happens, but I think, I believe that hopefully that's over with, and they'll leave the ships alone, just leave those ships alone. But so we do. We take their word for it. It was, we hit them very hard. They had a great capacity to withstand punishment. They took tremendous punishment. And, you could say there's a lot of bravery there. It was amazing what they took. But we honor their commitment and their word. They gave us their word that they wouldn't be shooting ships anymore, and we honor that.
An interesting wrinkle at the very least. You got to like his kind of homage to Pink Floyd there. Hey, Houthis, leave them ships alone. Here is an article from The Guardian this morning laying some of this out and discussing Trump's new wave of anti-Iranian attacks. Trump plans to announce the U.S. will refer to Arabian Gulf rather than Persian Gulf. That's going to crush the Iranians. They're going to be so upset because their history is the Persian Empire. And I've said many times over the years, I think that the final worldly boss is going to be Xerxes. We're going to still get to see the Persian Empire rise up before all of this is over, perhaps, or at least, what has been downstream from that Persian Empire. And there are definite similarities between the regime now and the way that the Persian Empire operated. Just saying. Donald Trump plans to announce while on his trip to Saudi Arabia next week that the U.S. will now refer to the Arabian Gulf or the Gulf of Arabia rather than the Persian Gulf. The move has prompted outrage from Iranian leaders, and last-minute efforts are being made to persuade Trump to pull back from offending Iran in the midst of vital talks on the future of the Iranian nuclear program. If Trump went ahead with the proposal, he would manage to unite every Iranian pro or anti-regime against him. And that is a near impossible achievement, one diplomat said. The Iranian foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, I don't know what, Aragchi? Whatever, said he hoped the absurd rumor about a name change was disinformation, adding that names of Middle East waterways, quote, did not imply ownership by any particular nation, but rather reflects a shared respect for the collective heritage of humanity. And so Trump is going to unite all of the Iranian people against him by saying that it's going to be the Arabian Gulf and not the Persian Gulf. He changed the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. Don Bacon is going to vote that down as well, by the way. He's talked about Canada. He's talked about Greenland. He's talked about Panama. You got to wonder at some point if he's just trying to, bring out the demons, as he often does, bring these people out into the light, the undercover Trump haters who finally reach their last straw by having to stand up for another country. Maybe he's just manipulating narratives so that there's a widespread wave of mainstream media coverage about how Trump is doing this terrible anti-Iranian thing. The Iranians are going to hate him. That's going to compromise potential for a deal. No, it's not. We don't have to be toddlers about this. They're making deals at a very high level. They're not going to throw the deal away that they've worked months and months on that has these massive geopolitical implications over Trump joking, or maybe he's serious, but probably joking, about referring to the Persian Gulf as the Arabian Gulf, which is the way it's already referred to in other parts of the world and has been at other times. Here we are. The Persian Gulf has been used since Roman times. Okay. I guess that makes sense. Whoa. Oh, sorry. I was reading too fast. The term Persian Gulf. Wow. I was like, why would they have not used the water before then? So dumb. The term Persian Gulf has been used since Roman times, and the Gulf has been widely known by that name since the 16th century, with Iranians tracing their history back to the Persian Empire. The use of Gulf of Arabia and Arabian Gulf is dominant in many countries in the Middle East. The government of Iran, formerly Persia, threatened to sue Google in 2012 over the company's decision not to label the body of water at all on its maps. How mean. European diplomats trying to broker a deal between the U.S. and Iran over the nuclear program are urging the Iranian leadership not to, quote unquote, lose it over Trump's actions. But there are fears that hardliners in Iran opposed to the principle of talks with the U.S. will use Trump's gesture as a lever with which to argue the U.S. cannot be trusted. So it's European diplomats trying to broker the deal between the U.S. and Iran? Well, that is totally unbelievable right from the get-go. Why would Europe get any credit whatsoever for a deal between Trump and another nation? As if Europe is somehow on Trump's side. Oh, we're the U.S. allies. That's why we're helping. Except they're not allies. They're in direct opposition to Donald Trump and the way Donald Trump is trying to reshape geopolitics. So they're clearly not helping. This story actually would benefit them. They're saying Iran's hardliners are going to use this to thwart the deal, and Trump is now giving them the ammo. Well, that would require anyone actually believing this bullshit. But J.D. Vance, the vice president, speaking at a Munich security conference event in Washington, gave a very upbeat account of the talks, saying, so far, so good. Our proposition is simple. We don't care if people want nuclear power. They can have civil nuclear power. We don't mind that. But you can't have the kind of enrichment program that allows you to get to a nuclear weapon, and that's where we draw the line. So this is the second time J.D. Vance is speaking before the Munich Security Conference. The first was in Europe, and we were told how based and red-pilled J.D. Vance is for taking it to them about their censorship of their citizens. Oh, I'm sure that was very, very important. He appeared at the Global Military Industrial Complex's Coachella and told them that they were mean for silencing people. Where was J.D. Vance while we were all being silenced for 5 years? I don't remember him standing up for that, even though he was a senator. Crazy. Anyhow, he also went ahead and said that Putin's demands were too severe. He told that to the Munich Security Conference as well. He was asking for too much. Really? Fair enough. I mean, Donald Trump can use leverage however he wants, and he uses leverage in that way. You've seen him go back and forth between Russia and Ukraine, seeming to help more one or the other, more or less. But I don't see a need for J.D. Vance to be out there schlepping that. And, hey, man, these decisions are made above my pay grade on how these people are going to communicate. It's hard to know what their loyalties actually ultimately are, but it's strange, and it should be noted as strange. And I know it upsets the truthers a great deal when they hear somebody say things that aren't utterly groveling about J.D. Vance, because they immediately all decided that as soon as Donald Trump posted on Truth Social, I guess J.D. Vance is going to be the running mate in the fake campaign leading up to a fake election. Well, then immediately we got to grovel before J.D. Vance. Trump has just given him the stamp of approval, and that's all he needs, even though most of those same people now hate Mike Pence, who was the last guy Trump gave that stamp of approval to for that very important position. And then he failed to object to the certification of the fake 2020 election. That might be part of the plan. All good. I have an open mind about Mike Pence. It's just weird that people will hate Mike Pence and then just like J.D. Vance because Trump selected him. And because I know he speaks so clearly and he says all the things that the mainstream podcasters on the right say on their shows. And it's funny, again, how all the mainstream podcasters on the right are actually not on the right. And they even say they're not on the right. Joe Rogan is still a leftist. And he says that. He wanted to vote for Michelle Obama. And I get that now he is very friendly to Donald Trump. I'm just using it as an example. And then you got people like Dave Rubin and the rest of them. If you go around, Jordan Peterson, another subject, maybe we'll get back to that later this week on Friday. But the point being that we're talking about, once again, statists and grovelers and people whose goals are not making America great again, ultimately, unless it's great in the same way it was great before, which is under regime control. Supporters of the regime or not supporters of the regime, that's really the divide. There is no other divide. It's not D or R. It's not whether or not you identify as someone on the right or someone on the left. If you are supporting the global regime and you're supporting the power of the uniparty in the United States, you are a statist. You are on the left. That's all there is to it. Here is Donald Trump making a big announcement about a big announcement.
Have maybe before we're going to, as you know, the Middle East, Saudi Arabia. We're going to UAE and Qatar, and that'll be, I guess, Monday night. Some of you are coming with us. I think before then we're going to have a very, very big announcement to make, like as big as it gets, and I won't tell you on what, but it's going to, and it's very positive. I'd tell you if it was negative or positive. I can't keep that out. It is really, really positive. And that announcement will be made either Thursday or Friday or Monday before we leave. But it'll be one of the most important announcements that have been made in many years about a certain subject, very important subject. So you'll all be here.
So a big announcement. What is that announcement going to be? It could be a deal with Iran. That seems to be the most likely answer to that question. Obviously, I don't know. By Friday, maybe we'll know. And maybe I'll have to eat crow on that one. But it seems like it might be Iran. And again, as my friend Ghost of Base Patrick Henry speculates, if that is another Abraham Accord, that's going to be an enormous deal. And that would fly right in the face of every story we just covered and any indication that Israel might end up at war with Iran. And I suppose that depending on how the narrative fallout goes, that could have major impacts on how the public understands what's actually happening in Gaza at this point. So I look forward to maybe getting some answers to some of this in the near future. But for now, all of that stuff about Iran and the Houthis, etc., seems to be highly, highly suspect. Let us go to, I'm having a thought that I might not actually get to the crisis group report today because of, there's so much happening that I think is on signal. And I want to be able to go through it with some depth and with some thoughtful analysis, which means I can't just pack it into a tight little 2-minute segment all the time and just deliver headlines and then an emotional response as most of the mainstream does. And so I end up doing long episodes and still not having nearly enough time. I don't know how to solve that problem. But let's go to the New York Post. This is Miranda Devine, another media establishment normie. I know that people are like, Miranda Devine's done good work. She covered the Hunter Biden laptop. Yes, I get it. She did do those things. Corrupt Venezuelan officials facilitated Tren de Aragua's reign of terror in the U.S. Corrupt Venezuelan officials facilitated, that's the only quote word, Tren de Aragua's reign of terror in the United States. So she's putting it at the feet of corrupt Venezuelan officials. Again, it's the Venezuelan government. That's it. A newly released intelligence assessment has found that some Venezuelan government officials facilitated the illegal migration of members of the brutal Venezuelan criminal gang Tren de Aragua into the United States, quote, to advance what they see as the Maduro regime's goal of destabilizing governments and undermining public safety. So now we have Maduro and his government being blamed for Tren de Aragua. Now that's quite a claim. And, I don't know if she's being honest here or she's delivering an info op or she's just clueless, but this doesn't seem to be accurate at all. And I thought, well, this is weird. Maybe I should just read this intelligence assessment. And so that is exactly what I did. Because I'm not going to take Miranda Devine's word for it. Sorry, Miranda Devine. I mean, I don't really care, but, I also don't think she's going to hear this. Let me bring up this here PDF. Here is the National Intelligence Council's Sense of the Community Memorandum. They're just going to ask everybody what they think. And so I've highlighted a bunch of pieces in here. We're not going to go through the whole thing. I'm going to cut to these areas. Now, there is, just to be clear before we start, there are indications made in this, and we'll go through them, that Maduro is somehow involved. But primarily the point of this intelligence report is that it's not Maduro. In recent years, TDA leadership has faced setbacks, including losing their centralized location in Tocaron prison and having several senior TDA leaders arrested in Colombia by the Colombian National Police. In 2023, the Venezuelan regime cleared TDA from Tocaron prison, although the group's leaders were able to escape in the operation, possibly assisted by low-level Venezuelan military and political leaders, judging from DHS reporting. So the Venezuelan regime under Maduro was clearing out their headquarters, which is that prison. But the leaders escaped with potentially low-level military and political leaders. Okay? So the Maduro regime is going after them, and they escaped the Maduro regime. The regime may have expelled TDA from the prison to undercut regional press alleging TDA ties to disputed Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, or to disrupt further destabilizing activities by gang members inside Venezuela. So they expelled TDA from their headquarters to undercut regional press that tied the gang to Maduro. So they wanted to make the media look bad. They did all this to make the media look bad, but the leaders escaped, which I guess implies Maduro allowed them to escape. Maduro, as we've covered on this show before, has claimed that those leaders escaped and were brought to the U.S., that Tren de Aragua was brought to the U.S. by our own FBI and DEA. Are there factions in Venezuela aligned with the global regime? And of course, the answer is yes, there are. We've covered that extensively on the podcast because I think Venezuela is such a fantastic example for what the regime does in foreign countries in terms of stealing elections, calling the leaders authoritarian and autocrat, trying to delegitimize them in every way imaginable. This has been going on for a long time. The regime has been trying to take down Maduro for a long time, which is why I think it's important to parse these things in a sensible way rather than the way that's delivered to us by members of the mainstream media. Skipping forward, the small size of TDA's cells, its focus on low-skill criminal activities, and its decentralized structure make it highly unlikely that TDA coordinates large volumes of human trafficking or migrant smuggling. So they're just straight up not in that game, according to this intelligence assessment. Here is the headline of a section: Maduro regime probably not directing TDA activities. While Venezuela's permissive environment enables TDA to operate, the Maduro regime probably does not have a policy of cooperating with TDA and is not directing TDA movement to and operations in the United States. The IC bases this judgment on Venezuelan law enforcement actions demonstrating the regime treats TDA as a threat, an uneasy mix of cooperation and confrontation rather than top-down directives. Characterizing the regime's ties to other armed groups and the decentralized makeup of TDA that would make such a relationship logistically challenging. They assess that some Venezuelan government officials facilitate TDA members' migration from Venezuela to the U.S. and use members as proxies in Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and the United States to advance what they see as the Maduro regime's goal of destabilizing governments and undermining public safety in these countries. And so let's just pause on that for a second and go back to Miranda Devine, because that was, she does include the quote about what they see. Here we are. But that is not the framing. Okay? She is clearly in this paragraph tying the TDA activity to the Maduro regime. And again, this would be like blaming Donald Trump for something Adam Schiff was doing. There are certainly global regime and deep state elements operating in Venezuela. The global regime propped up a fake president for 3 years. And yes, I understand that Donald Trump also went along with that story. What else is he going to do? They propped up a fake president for 3 years. He was never at any time the president. He was only the leader of the parliament, which they had control over. So the illegitimate people controlled the factions within the government or the parts of government that were regime aligned, but the only real power that matters is Maduro, because the military is with Maduro. The global regime corruption is rampant there as it is here. And by the way, an interesting post from Polymath Anon in the chat. Some of the people that escaped were part of the Machado campaign, and that's Maria Corina Machado, who ran with Edmundo Gonzalez. She wasn't actually the candidate. Edmundo Gonzalez was. It was basically a Joe Biden and Kamala Harris thing. You get the old guy to bring in this young, vibrant woman. And Elon Musk actually pushed support for Machado on X, formerly Twitter. Now, is that part of an info op? I don't know, but it's certainly not a good thing to be doing if it's for real. Let's continue in the report. The IC has not observed the regime directing TDA, including to push migrants to the United States, which probably would require extensive coordination and funding between regime entities and TDA leaders that we would collect. And again, a bunch of this report is redacted. It should be noted. Some regime officials are probably willing to capitalize on migration flows for personal, financial, or other benefits, even though the Maduro regime probably is not systematically directing Venezuelan outflows, such as to sow chaos in receiving countries. So Maduro is not conducting the Venezuelan migration to other countries. Totally detached from this. It says it over and over again. It gives every possible way. Continuing down. U.S. law enforcement reports claim members of the regime, including Cabello and former Venezuelan Minister of Penitentiaries, Iris Varela, have cooperated with TDA by providing financial or materiel support. But we cannot verify the source's access. So the source they have that claims these members of Maduro's government are facilitating this cannot be verified. Even so, these reports do not claim that these figures direct the group. So it weakens the claim even further. Some reports come from people detained for involvement in criminal activity in the United States or for entering the country illegally, which could motivate them to make false allegations about their ties to the Venezuelan regime in an effort to deflect responsibility for their crimes and to lessen any punishment by providing exculpatory or otherwise valuable information to U.S. prosecutors. So some of the claims are from prisoners who have motivation to make false allegations. And we can leave the report there. But I thought that was absolutely incredible. That is the actual intelligence assessment. If you were a liar in the mainstream media or someone who wanted to, and I'm not saying that Miranda Devine is necessarily, she might be, but I'm not saying that. If you wanted to make an anti-Maduro case using Tren de Aragua, you would talk around the edges in the very few and far between places in that report that suggested Maduro was even tangentially involved. But if you wanted to honestly report about what that intelligence assessment says, it says again and again and again and again and again that Maduro's not involved. There's no reason to believe he is involved. The people who claim that his officials are involved can't be trusted and it can't be verified. That's an incredible report. You pair that with the crisis group report, and the case against Maduro in Venezuela becomes even more ridiculous. And I know that this stuff offends a lot of people because they have just taken on the notion that Maduro is an authoritarian communist dictator who's involved in stealing elections not only in Venezuela but in the United States, even though that was Chavez. And they're not the same person. And I guess once you have taken on those beliefs, well, then it's impossible to look at this and observe the macro pattern that repeats all over the world. Okay? This isn't based on information like this, which is all that people are going on. The conflation of Chavez with Maduro in regard to elections, the idea that Maduro stole his election, which is what Elon was propagating last year. And, of course, now the Tren de Aragua thing, all of these things are meant to suggest that somehow the macro pattern should be ignored in this case because of just how bad Maduro is. And then, of course, there's always someone piping in, well, I'm from Venezuela, or my cousin's from Venezuela, and they say that Maduro's very bad. Okay, well, I can find millions of people in the United States who are from the United States, who have cousins from the United States, who think that Donald Trump is bad. It doesn't make him bad. And it doesn't mean he's responsible for the things that Adam Schiff does, or Barack Obama does, or Hillary Clinton does, or even that people in his own administration do if they're not in alignment with what Donald Trump is doing. It's not what the Republican Party does. What Donald Trump does and what the Republican Party does are totally separate. And he's certainly not responsible for the Democrat Party. And when you understand that Donald Trump is fighting a global regime faction, the Uniparty in the United States, just like Maduro is fighting a regime faction in Venezuela, then the framing and the logic become obvious. Venezuela is not an exception to the macro pattern. It is a part of the macro pattern. And its alliances, its protection from Russia and from China, and its connections to those countries as part of the sovereign nationalist multipolar order that is emerging is undeniable. So it really is another one of those instances where you have to actually decide what to believe for yourself. Are you going to trust the macro pattern that is playing out all across the world? A pattern whose examples I have given again and again and again and again and again in country after country after country for years now. You're going to ignore that because of mainstream media stories like this one, claims about Tren de Aragua, claims about what Chavez did with the elections and how the election fraud system was spawned in Venezuela. That might all be true. It doesn't mean that Nicolas Maduro is the enemy down there. That's the dude fighting our same enemy. And I don't even have to say that he's a good guy or anything. I don't know that he's a good guy. Maybe he does bad things. Maybe he does bad things to bad people. What if you were in France, let's say, and they were having a conversation about the United States, and someone was like, well, I'm from the United States. My cousin's from the United States, whatever it is. Donald Trump is prosecuting his political opponents. He's an authoritarian dictator. Would that be true because the person was from the United States? Of course not. All of these notions just have to leave our minds forever. Okay? It's retarded. It is retardation. And it's okay to have kind of remnant retardation within ourselves, right? The indoctrination was very thorough. It was a complete and total brainwashing. But nonetheless, we have to get rid of those parts that are still retarded, and believing this way is retarded. Somebody being from Venezuela has absolutely no bearing on the truth claims and is not remotely close to enough to reject a massive, repetitive macro pattern that has not failed at any point. And Nicolas Maduro blames the Biden regime, fake though they may be. It's part of the story. Blames the FBI, blames the DEA, and says that he'd like to be friends with Donald Trump. The retardation must evaporate. It must go away. I wish you all reduced retardation as I wish it for myself. Polymath Anon in the Rumble chat says, the crisis group report is interesting. I hope Chris gets to it. Well, it is interesting, and I will get to it, but it probably isn't today because I want to spend more than 40 minutes or so on it. I think it's probably like an hour and a half segment. It's really intensely interesting, and I think it's such a good cheat sheet for geopolitics that I think it's well worth going through extensively. And again, it's only a week old. It was written to assess Trump at 100 days. We're at, I guess, 108 today, so it's 8 days old. We're going to do it on Friday, if not today. And maybe I'll start it. I think we're just going to do it on Friday. Okay, let us continue with the Maduro business. And by the way, this is Maduro today. Guess where he is? Can you guess? Oh, he's shaking hands with Vladimir Putin. He's at the Kremlin. And the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs on Telegram posted earlier on May 7th, President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, and the President of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, held talks in Moscow. The two leaders discussed the current state and prospects for the development of Russian-Venezuelan cooperation in the political, trade, and economic, financial, scientific, and technological, as well as humanitarian and cultural areas. They also exchanged views on pressing matters on the international and regional agendas. Following Russia-Venezuela talks, the heads of state signed the treaty between the Russian Federation and the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela on strategic partnership and cooperation. Russia is going to be celebrating its Victory Day in just 2 days, and Trump has now named tomorrow as American Victory Day in World War II. And I guess he's changing Veterans Day into American Victory Day in World War I. I don't know what this is for necessarily. I guess we're going to just have to wait and see. It's a little strange, especially with the enormity of Russia's celebration and how leaders from around the world are visiting Russia. Xi Jinping landed in Russia today for that celebration. Let's see about that. They addressed that as well here. President Putin said, "Mr. President and friends, I am delighted to welcome you to Moscow. We've already met on the sidelines of the BRICS summit in Kazan, but I am extremely grateful to you for taking the time to come to the celebrations of victory in the Second World War. In our country, we call it the Great Patriotic War. Victory over Nazism is a special day for Russia and the Russian people. This year not only marks the 80th anniversary of the Great Victory, but also the 80th anniversary of diplomatic relations between our countries. The celebrations are over, but we have not forgotten this landmark event. I would like to point out that our relations are based on the Treaty on Strategic Partnership. It offers a solid foundation for our cooperation, and we have achieved tangible results working on this foundation." And they keep going. They do talk about, Putin does talk about Hugo Chavez at the end. He says, "We remember our friend Hugo Chavez very well. He was a remarkable leader, not only for your country, but for all of Latin America. He was without question a friend of Russia. Today, you are continuing his mission, and we wish you every success. We will have the opportunity to discuss all the areas of cooperation I just mentioned." So he says nice things about Chavez. He seems to have a very good and happy relationship with Maduro, and says directly that Maduro and Venezuela may end up becoming part of BRICS, or whatever that turns out to be. So, unless Putin is still the bad guy, it's beginning to seem a little silly to think that Maduro is. And hey, that's just me. Let us continue. And this will probably be, we're not going to get to the crisis group thing. So this will probably be the last thing for today. But I think it's very interesting. Now, the subject matter is a few months old. I did not realize that. And that upsets me to some degree. I found out about this yesterday from a normie Twitter influencer, which also depresses me a bit. But this is Insurrection Barbie on X, formerly Twitter. Elon Musk reposts her fairly regularly, or interacts with her fairly regularly, which is, whatever indication, whatever your thoughts are, it's just information among other information. Take it in, decide how you want to view it, but it's important to present the full picture as much as we can. So she writes a Twitter thread, how Norm Eisen's 2025 Democracy Playbook plans to take over for the midterms without the presidency. What happens if Democrats plus globalist NGOs lose the White House? Nothing changes, because they've spent years building a machine that runs without needing the presidency. Here's how they plan to rule through lawfare, NGOs, media, and states, plus their plans for the 2026 midterms. And she says, yes, I read the playbook. The playbook is 178 pages long, but the last 80 pages of it are just links, references, citations of sources. But Norm Eisen and a man named, hold on, let me pull this up. Let me pull up the Democracy Playbook here. Actually, let's go to the Democracy Playbook for a second, and then we'll come back to this thread. Because I want to note one thing that pops up fairly early on in the report, and then, of course, is presented many more times throughout. So this is Norm Eisen and Jonathan Katz. It's Brookings Institution, and they are the editors. And you got to love, they have all these protesters with their peace signs up, wearing masks. These are 2020 COVID people on the cover of the Democracy Playbook. And I'm not sure I see anyone who's not in a mask. So again, another perfect example of what kind of people we're dealing with here. Okay, so here's just a very quick example of the tone of this and the purpose of this. They write, experts across the ideological spectrum agree that the U.S. at the federal level constitutes a backsliding democracy. Although there are differing views on how fast and how far that slide might go, including at the state level, where there is also erosion. The health of U.S. democracy is of critical importance within and beyond its borders. And so we're talking about our democracy worldwide and how important it is in places that aren't the United States. Why is Norm Eisen at the Brookings Institution writing a democracy playbook to benefit countries that aren't the United States? And the entire democracy playbook is a subversion of the duly elected president of the United States, who serves with an obvious and overwhelming mandate from the people that is clear and is made clear in repeated fashion over and over and over throughout the time he's been serving. That's incredible, isn't it? But let us go back to the thread here. State level election control. The White House does not certify elections. Secretaries of State do. In 2026, Democrats and NGOs, for example, the Democracy Alliance, the Democratic Association of the Secretaries of State, are spending $40 million to dominate swing state election offices. The offices. And as we just saw earlier, the election offices in states can be corrupted and made complicit in the rigged election scheme. She writes, control the election referees, control the election. And that was the strategy in 2020 as well. We saw the Center for Tech and Civic Life and David Plouffe, the former Obama campaign manager, doing exactly that with Mark Zuckerberg's $500 million. Step 2, the civil society army. The NGOs never leave. NGOs don't leave when presidents change. Groups like Democracy Docket, that's Mark Elias. We've read a number of his pieces. The Brennan Center, mentioned them earlier. Common Cause. Fair Fight Action, that's Stacey Abrams. Southern Coalition for Social Justice. The Movement Voter Project. The Southern Poverty Law Center, and Indivisible. They stay and fight regardless of who's in office. Step 3, the lawfare and the courts. The legal system is immune to elections. NGO and Democrat lawyers flood the courts 24/7. We've already seen that. Blocking state laws, suing over voter roll rules, fighting ID requirements, forcing states to adopt expansive voting laws. Litigation locks in rules that presidents can't easily undo. And again, that's why they use the courts. They use the courts to make precedent, and then they consider precedent as law. Somehow this is going to have to be stopped in the states. That's not something that Donald Trump can do, which again requires us to refocus away from the national and toward the local in terms of the time we spend on these issues. And again, I talked about this a bit at GART over the weekend. I have responsibility for that as well. I could totally remove all my focus from national politics and stop doing the show. Of course, it would probably require that. I don't think anybody's going to listen to me talk about local politics where I live. That would be pointless. So I understand that I'm not immune to this concern and this problem. And at some point, that's just going to be the way. That'll have to take over. Otherwise, we just end up assessing psyops and hoodwinkings all day long forever, and that's pointless. The stuff she just mentioned, state laws, voter rolls, ID requirements, and the like, that's got to be handled at the state level. Step 4, media and tech narrative control. White House gone, doesn't matter. Big media and big tech remain aligned. NGO partners plus think tanks push platforms to censor misinformation, boost pro-democracy narratives, silence populist speech. NGO partners, Brennan Center, ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, that's the organization that calls everybody anti-Semitic and tries to get their advertisers to stop sponsoring their shows, and Media Matters. And they also try to get people censored, et cetera. And then Media Matters are just insane, shit-brained communists who just make up conspiracy theories and try to get people canceled. Step 5, corporate and academia leverage. Universities, HR departments, Fortune 500 companies don't flip red with the presidency. Through ESG, DEI, and NGO partnerships, they push civic norms. Election denial equals disinfo. Voting restrictions equal racism. Democracy needs protection from nationalists. Culture capture continues. Step 6, international and foreign leverage. Presidents come and go. Global institutions do not. Brookings, NDI, Open Society, the UN, the EU, and foreign-funded NGOs will pressure GOP states internationally. That does happen. Fund lawsuits. Attack authoritarian U.S. actors abroad. Again, we just discussed some examples of that. Globalization and democracy promotion equals permanent pressure. Step 7, protest and street power. 2020 wasn't a one-off. NGOs fund and mobilize. Indivisible, Move On, Color of Change, the Sunrise Movement, and SEIU and the teachers' unions to flood the streets and corporate offices if, quote-unquote, democracy is threatened. Election crisis equals instant mass pressure. Who wins and who loses? And it's worth noting that we didn't have an election crisis last year because it was not a contested election. Trump, quote-unquote, won, and then that was it. And the media immediately said, Trump won by so much. And then they reduced his win to a very small win. Who wins and who loses? Who gains power? Democrats and aligned civil society, NGO ecosystem and globalist foundations, tech, media, and academia. Who loses? Populists, state-level conservatives, election integrity, and skeptic movements. The Democracy Playbook 2025 isn't just a think piece. It's the strategy to govern no matter who wins elections. Lock in rules by lawfare, capture election offices, control media narratives, mobilize NGOs, and street power. White House or not, the power remains. The question is, what are we planning on doing to counter it? And most people are not planning on doing that because they are busy trusting the plan and trusting Trump, which I also do trust that there is a plan that Trump is leading and that plan will be successful. But at the state level and in the minds and consciences of the people, more has to be done. Trump can't fix every problem. And the plan, no matter how intricate, no matter how high level, no matter how well thought out and gamed out, cannot fix every problem. And if you think the promise of the plan is to fix every problem, you might be retarded. It's not possible, okay? The plan has provided a backstop and an opportunity for the American people to rise up and take their power back. Trump said he's giving power back to you, the people. That's what we have to do. And instead we have talk about whether or not a bill is going to pass and nonsense about midterm elections. And I understand that Trump has to play a part in that. He has to go along with those notions, or else people immediately realize, oh, the whole system is defunct. And then that's the major mental and emotional and psychological break that this entire period has played out the way it has, specifically to avoid. Okay? So I understand that Donald Trump's going to communicate things in a different way than I am, but I'm not Donald Trump. And we don't have some underlying responsibility to do exactly what he does at all times and believe that everything he says is true when he says it, even though he says competing things, because he's manipulating narratives. He's creating a public discussion and a public argument. He's creating that division, and through that division and the friction it causes, some of these issues get decided and they advance in the public understanding so that we can actually move forward. Why are people preventing that process from occurring? Now, in regard to this thread, everything she just described is part of what I was describing for all of last year in regard to the elections. And I would encourage anyone who hasn't heard the episode, if you want an episode to listen to on one of the days I'm not doing a show, go back and listen to the episode called Lose the Training Wheels from January of 2024. It was about how to approach the question of voting and other election-related questions, knowing that elections are fake. Throughout the entire year, I talked about how too big to rig means narratively too big to rig. The system is under the control of the enemy to whatever degree necessary. Ultimately, the media could have come out the night of the election and said, there are a lot of votes still to be counted. And Donald Trump, he seems to have a big lead now, but it might evaporate just like it did in 2020, and run the same playbook they ran in 2020. But they didn't run that playbook. They ran a different playbook. Okay. And so the point being, if you understand, if you are the regime, if you're the uniparty, if you're the people in control of elections, stealing elections, and subverting the constitutional order, subverting the duly elected president, if that's you and you understand that the election is already narratively too big to rig, what choice do you have? You can't sell the public another round of the Biden presidency. You can't really sell them a Kamala Harris either. You got no choice. It's narratively too big to rig. If you say that Trump has lost, well, then people aren't going to believe you. And if people don't believe you, well, then the system begins to break down. The whole election system begins to break down. And you can't really have anybody in government because everybody understands that the elections that would place those people in government are themselves illegitimate. Okay? The system breaks down. And you can't afford that if you are the regime, if you are the uniparty. For us, that's the goal. Getting people to understand that the elections are fake and illegitimate, and that the people governing them, making rules about how you can live your life, are illegitimate. That's a big deal. And we can't get there because we're concerned about winning fake elections. Okay? So as the regime, you know that the election is too big to rig. So what are you going to do? You're going to give Donald Trump the win, say Donald Trump won, and then down ballot, take the House races take everything local and at the state level, take the House races to whatever extent you can so that it is plausible and believable as a real election without actually providing a real and true advantage. And as we can see with these Republican defectors, the advantage in Congress, not that it matters, but the advantage in Congress is very small. And we actually had to pull Elise Stefanik off the UN ambassador position because we needed that seat in Congress. Got to keep up the show. The Senate is basically even at this point. I know it's not, but for all intents and purposes, when you got Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins and Thom Tillis, then hero JD has to come in and save us. But that's what we're dealing with in the Senate. So you have total subversion throughout the government at every other level besides the president, and you're using all of those other levels to thwart what the president wants to do. That's the sort of thing you could ride out for 4 years, doing lawfare, using the propaganda, etc. I said all of this was going to happen throughout last year. And this democracy playbook from Norm Eisen, who's the architect for what the Uniparty does in overthrowing governments, he's been an architect of other color revolutions around the world as well. This is the color revolution guy. He's suggesting all of those same things. That's exactly what they're going to do. It's an admission. They'd rather not have Trump there, right? They'd rather have some guy who's just on their side and able to communicate everything so well that the American people are just gladly walking themselves into whatever dystopia he intends, quote unquote, democracy in their terms. They'd rather have somebody in there, but they will accept Trump, especially if preventing Trump from being in there causes the rest of the system to break down and for everybody to lose faith. But that's not what happened, is it? They said Trump won. The TV said Trump won. We had really important wins here and there in the House and the Senate, knowing that elections were obviously stolen all over the place. And what did people do? How did they respond? Well, a lot of people then checked out of politics. They were very hyped up about politics last year because they knew we needed a change. We needed to get rid of Biden, move on from Biden. We can't have Kamala. We need Trump. So they're involved. And then they're like, okay, well, all you people who said that the elections were rigged, well, they hate Trump the worst, and he won. So apparently elections aren't rigged. But they are. And this is the purpose, because they still control all those other organs of the government. Again, this is not a black pill. We're doing just fine. Everything's going to be fine. The people will ultimately be the determining factor, and the people are shifting rapidly in our direction and continue to over time. I don't see any way that's going to slow down. And again, there are many Trump cards that Trump has not played, like disclosure about elections, like all these various files. Maybe we'll see what happens with Epstein files. Again, same thing as the JFK files. I don't actually expect much. These people, the stories are old. The events in the stories happened a long time ago. And it's been bad people with control over the information for the majority of that time. I would love to be proven wrong about that. I'm just saying, don't step on the rug. You're not going to get the rug pulled on you, causing you to fall on your face if you're not standing on the rug. So just don't get on the rug. Just watch what happens. It's totally okay. You don't need to go around telling all the normies and the communists you're still friends with, just wait till they bring out the Epstein files. That's very much how everything was operating 5 years ago. It's not that way now to the same extent, which is good. But just don't stand on the rug. A lot of it's going to be rugs. Anyhow, that was a tangent. The point is, there are ways for them to subvert things. Okay? Trump's awesome. It's not a black pill. Trump's awesome. They're doing the right thing. I think it's all going very successfully. What ultimately matters, same as Venezuela, is who's in control and who's the military siding with. Seems like we're on the right side of that. Okay? I mean, when push comes to shove, that's it. It's really just the military. And so we might be under military government right now. In some sense, you might say devolution is military government, and maybe that's what it is. And if that's what it is, we should wrestle with that. But ultimately, I think most people would be okay with that right now, considering the alternative as being the global regime. But that's probably what it is. And so this stuff is just to destabilize the country and cause so much havoc that the people turn against the side that they believed was looking out for them. That's what all this is for. They're going to wreak havoc on people's lives using whatever instruments of power they have. And we've seen that over the years. And we've seen that in other countries. When the global regime is waging economic warfare against Russia at the beginning of the so-called Ukraine war, that's waging warfare against the people of Russia. It's not kinetic. They're not dropping bombs on the people of Russia. They're just trying to make their money worthless, which is a terrible psychological effect and a reality-based effect. Cause a lot of problems in people's lives. They debank people in the United States. They censor people, etc. All of these things are meant to destabilize a society so that the people will turn against the sovereign, nationalist, populist leader and accept once again the global regime, its control, and its agenda. Okay? And so this is why it's critical and necessary to actually analyze these things beyond the ability to continue pattern matching that, oh, this is definitely some plan. See, this piece of mainstream media matches this thing from 7 years ago, therefore plan. Everything's cool. Okay. The backstop is cool. I've talked about it as a playpen before, right? There's limits on what the bad thing can be. But eventually people have to take responsibility for themselves and then try to take some responsibility within a community. And those things can't be solved by just referencing a plan over and over again, right? People get upset at those of us in Badlands for talking about this stuff, which is, first of all, retarded. But Badlands is formed by the guy responsible for the devolution theory, which is a plan by the military and Trump. And it's aligned with what people think the other plan is. It's just about an approach on analyzing our reality, understanding the circumstances, and then how we should proceed to act. It's not complicated. It's not against any of that stuff. It's just a different way of analyzing than clickbaiting. All right. I'm going to check the chat and then we are going to get on out of here. I hope you guys had a good time with the subscriber stream. Also, forgot to mention, Rocks Cry Out is now a monthly supporter on Rumble. Thank you very much for your support. And check in Substack quickly. All right, everybody. I will be back on Friday at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic. And Joe Biden was never president.
Well,
what?
You know who I am, don't you?
Well, you ain't Fiona Apple. And if you ain't Fiona Apple, I don't give a rat's ass.
What's wrong with being an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times? What do you think, Max?
Do you want to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times?
Yeah, I think I'd like to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times.
It's not true. It's more true than I would perhaps prefer.
Can we stop this cruel game and allow the boy to keep one shred of dignity? For God's sakes! I can't stand to see him in all this pain! You vicious bastards! Let him move in with you! Is it so bad to see somebody happy? So just let him move in! For the love of God, let the boy move in with you! Good Lord!
And I will not let you down.
We do a little trolling. It's called We Do a Little Trolling.
What must be what? In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening for free and would like to support the show, the best way to do that is by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can find the info stream over on Telegram at t.me/veryreasonable. The merch site is cancelcouture.com. And for all my other links, you can visit linktree.com/imyourmoderator. And I'll see you soon. Down on the range.